dealing with this topic that there are some people who just will not change their minds on it, and I'm not. Nothing I say is going to change their minds. So yeah, that's fine. But I'm interested in that sort of that 33% or so who aren't sure, because I want them to just have a bit of a think about some of the things I'm going to say today. I do have a fair bit to say, so I'm just wondering, should we kick off?
Sure. Yeah. But before you do, let me let everybody know about the polls, so that we can
Sure.
kind of see how if they fluctuate any. Right now on Twitter, to the question, do you believe, divinity aside, do you believe Jesus existed? Yes is 29%, no is 41%, and the undecideds are 30%. And then on YouTube, out of 500 votes, you have the yeses are 21%, no's are 43%, and uncertains are 35%. So if you could get those undecided votes, then that would put the check mark in the yes column.
Now pay attention, people.
Okay,
pay attention.
Let's see what I can do. Look, the first thing I would say is hello to all my haters. I know that they're out in force today, and it was interesting after the last show that in the live chat you had an amazing number of experts in medieval history in the live chat. But when I challenged them afterwards and said, "Okay, you guys had a lot to say in the live chat. Do you want to take me on now?" The sound of crickets was deafening. So it seems that many people are very, very brave when I can't talk back. So all I'd say to anyone you see in the live chat that's fighting a good brave fight when I can't talk back, just ask them if they're going to take me on in the comments afterwards, because I will be there and I will answer every comment that anyone makes in relation to what I have to say, particularly if you misrepresent what I say. So hello, haters.
Or we'll copy his email response to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Behave, Carl. Look, I think the first thing I do want to say, though, just getting serious, the first thing I do want to say is I quite legitimately understand why people do find mythicism appealing, and why many people find it convincing. Because if you think about it, Christianity makes a series of, fundamentally, what are a series of historical claims. Unlike many other religions, Christianity is actually founded pretty solidly on claims that it says are true, which are basically claims about history. And those claims are things like, there was this guy Jesus and he said this. There was this guy Jesus and he did that. There was this guy Jesus and he was a number of theological and mystical things. And you can argue against the claims of Christianity by looking at those sorts of claims, those historical claims, and say, well, he didn't say that, or when he said it, he didn't mean this, or he didn't do that, or he couldn't have done that, rising from the dead, for example, walking on water, or he wasn't those things, you've misunderstood. Or you can cut the ground out from underneath Christianity completely. You can pull the rug out from underneath Christianity completely and go to much less effort by simply countering the original claim, which is there was this guy Jesus. That's effectively what mythicism does. So mythicism is a very effective rhetorical tool if your primary motivation, whether you realize it or not, is you want to debunk Christianity. And this is why I think it is very appealing to a lot of people, because a lot of people are coming at the question from a point of view of, well, is Christianity true? How can I debunk, not is Christianity true, how can I debunk Christianity? And the easiest and most effective way to debunk Christianity is by denying that Jesus existed. Once you do that, all the other claims of Christianity become completely and utterly irrelevant. So I get why people like it. If you want a big stick with which to hit Christianity because you don't like Christianity, mythicism gives you the biggest stick available. And this is why it is very emotionally appealing to many people. I think one of the reasons why it's also convincing to many people is if you, particularly if you're coming from a Christian background, if you kind of work out that this whole God idea is not terribly convincing, and you're starting to tend towards some degree of atheism or at least agnosticism, and then you look at the whole Christian claim. The Christian claim is, well, God does exist because he came to earth in the form of Jesus Christ. And you're starting to think about, well, okay, how did that story arise if there is no God? If you then go looking for an answer to that question, particularly these days when a lot of people go looking by Googling, if you Google, how did Christianity begin? Or the origins of Christianity? Or did Jesus exist? You tend to find two types of information come up. One is Christian apologetic material, particularly fundamentalist Christian apologetic material that says, yes, he did exist, and he was Jesus Christ, the Lord, the Saviour, the Son of God, and the second person of the Trinity and God in human form, who died on the cross and rose again to save us all from sin and hell and all that shit. Or the other type of material you tend to get is mythicist material. So if you go looking for an answer to the question of how did Christianity arise, what's the origins of Christianity? What you tend to find is either Christian apologist stuff or mythicist stuff. What you don't tend to find, or at least what's much harder to find, particularly online, is something in the middle, which is non-Christian scholarly material on the origins of Christianity. And the thing that interests me in this is that I've been studying that stuff in the middle for 35 years. And it's much more interesting. This gets back to my constant theme that the real story is much more interesting than the bad history. It's much more interesting and much more convincing that there was a historical guy and he was nothing like what the Christians claim. But if you go looking for this stuff and you find a whole lot of mythicist stuff and a whole lot of Christian apologist stuff, and you're already pretty much inclined towards some form of atheism or agnosticism, then the mythicist stuff is going to be much more appealing. And quite often what I find is that one of the other reasons people are very emotionally invested in this question is that they associate they're being convinced by mythicism with their deconversion from Christianity. And so I find the people who are most sort of passionate in their defense of mythicism are quite often emotionally invested because for them, mythicism and their deconversion from Christianity go hand in hand. They're the same thing. And so I have actually come across, when I used to spend a lot more time bothering to debate mythicists, I've actually 3 times had people say to me, well, everything you're saying is making sense, and yes, there are major problems with the mythicist position, but if I accept that there was a historical Jesus, that means if the Christians are right about this, maybe they're right about everything else as well. So they are clinging to, in these cases, this is obviously not every mythicist, but in these cases, these people are clinging to mythicism because they see it as a slippery slope argument. If they accept that there was a historical Jesus, then maybe they have to accept all the other stuff, and they're going to end up having to accept Christianity again, and they don't want that. So I can see how people do get very emotionally invested in this topic, and this is why I get hate mail. This is why a lot of people get very upset. And this is why people call me a crypto-Christian and a fake atheist and all of that crap, and a liar.
We all know that.
And insane.
We all know that.
All that stuff. Keep in mind, I'm not saying that those are the only reasons that people accept mythicism. And there are people who do have a very good grasp of the material and still accept mythicism. There's just not very many of them.
Sure. It's Steve and I, where Steve and I think probably the one thing we actually agree on is this, where we just don't have a dog in the fight. To me, my personal views on it is whether he did exist or he didn't. Let's say he did, that's great. You still can't go from that to he was the Son of God. So I don't think that by allowing you can't grant that. Just because he existed, that means that he is the Son of God. And then in the flip side, if he didn't exist, well, then obviously, which we are now, but we were right all along in the first place. So it doesn't, it's just one of those things that it's not a hill that I'm going to die on. I like hearing the arguments. That's why we've had Carrier on a few times to talk about this, and while we're going to hear the other side now. But as far as something that it's a hill I'm going to die on, this is not the one. The Sphinx is the hill I'll die on.
And I agree with Kyle on that. I agree with your analysis, actually, Tim, a lot. And I do think it's a mistake for some people to think that not by giving ground, by steel manning a person's argument, saying, okay, let's say Jesus existed, let's go from there and address the arguments, because I agree with you 1,000%. The biggest weapon you can bring to this fight is showing that he never existed. At that point, everything else is irrelevant, right? So like you said, break that column, the columns that's holding up Christianity down. That would be fine if they could actually do that. Now, I think that, there might be arguments either way, but I think they're investing too much time on that, which is something like Kyle and I think we don't have a dog in that fight. We can see valid arguments on both sides, but I think they're wasting too much time on that than addressing if he existed, then go ahead and try to demonstrate that the reasoning for Christianity is flawed or something like that, because I think it's just too much time wasted on this mythicism thing.
I'm fine with him doing it. Like,
sure.
I don't think it's time wasted. Like, I think the argument's good. Well, it's just not something
sure. I don't. Yeah, I agree with that. Let me phrase. I don't think it's wasted time. I think that it's worth talking about, but I think people are too much emotionally invested in it one way or another. And like I said, whether it's one or the other, it's fine. But I think there's good arguments both ways.
I think one thing I should point out is that one person who says you shouldn't use mythicism as an argument against Christianity is Richard Carrier. Which is one of the few things I kind of agree with Richard Carrier on. But he says it's just too uncertain. Even mythicism is too uncertain. Okay, and so there are much better ways to attack. Yeah, it's a bad way to actually attack Christianity, which is interesting coming from the guy who's the biggest booster of mythicism around. But
no, he makes sense on that. That's true.
It's honest.
I agree with him. I think it's a bad argument. It's a bad tactic. I also think it's a bad argument, but he and I disagree on that. There is one thing I do, just before we kind of get into the arguments. So there is one thing I do want to address, and it came up in the Twitter, the pre-show Twitter chat that was going on, kind of frenetic one that was going on this morning, where people kept saying that they would disagree with me making an argument from consensus. And I want to make this absolutely clear. I don't know how many times I need to fucking tell people this, but I do not make an argument from consensus. I do not say that because there's a major consensus of the overwhelming majority of scholars, Christian and non-Christian, who accept that there most likely was a historical Jesus, therefore there was a historical Jesus. I have not said that. I've never said that, and I will never say that, because that's a fallacious argument. What I do say, though, is there has to be a reason why there is this consensus. It does exist. I've had some people try and tell me it doesn't. It does. You can count the number of actual scholars, qualified people like Carrier, on the fingers of about one hand. There's very, very few actual scholars. And this is out of thousands of scholars. Now, some people try and dismiss that and say, well, most of them are Christians. Fine, forget about the Christians. Let's just look at the non-Christian scholars. There are still thousands of scholars, Jewish, atheist, agnostic, or just plain non-Christians, who all accept that it is most likely there was a historical Jesus. That's a fact. So what I say is, you have to kind of, if you're going to be a skeptic and a rationalist, you have to kind of ask yourself, why does that consensus exist? Is it really that all these people are deluded? Is it really that all these people are brainwashed somehow by Christians on this point, not on anything else? Is it really that Christianity somehow has this massive stranglehold on all forms, all other areas of scholarship, including early Jewish studies? I mean, why would the Jews be interested in accepting that Jesus existed? Because they're not accepting Jesus Christ, they're accepting the historical Jesus, a Jew. So it doesn't make sense that this consensus would exist simply because of some conspiracy or simply because of social pressure. So the question has to be, why does that consensus exist? Why is it that the people who are best qualified to assess this stuff are least likely to be convinced by mythicism, and the people who are least qualified to assess this stuff, which is most mythicists, most of whom aren't scholars, are the ones who are most likely to be convinced? In any other area, any other question, when you get that sort of imbalance with those experts massively on one side and a tiny handful of people who just happen to have a bit of an ideological bias on the other, any rationalist would look at that and say, even though I haven't looked at the arguments yet, there must be a reason why the experts are all on one side. But I want to stress, that does not mean the experts are therefore necessarily right. Of course it doesn't. But we have to be rational and look at that consensus and think it must exist for a reason. So I want to make that absolutely clear. Can people please stop saying, I'm saying because there's a consensus, therefore they're right. That doesn't follow. But we need to take account of that consensus without resorting